We are live. Welcome back, gentlemen. Welcome to the Calling All Men Summit. This is Michael Sky. I'm here with my co-host, partner in crime, Hans Komain. I'm in
Morning.
Nairobi. I'm in Nairobi. He's in Medellin, and our guest hails from South Africa, but is currently living in Denmark. Today in the Calling All Men Summit, we're going to talk about raising strong sons. We're going to talk about raising sons to be men. We're going to talk about initiation and, in general, the crises that men and boys are in today.
Mhm.
So, yeah, those of you who don't know, we started yesterday. You can go to our website and subscribe to participate in all 50 interviews this week with great men. And then we're doing a bunch of live interviews here on our Facebook page, um, facebook.com/calling all men summit. This is where the live broadcast will be. So you may be watching us from Hans's platform. You might be watching us from one of my platforms. You might be watching us from one of our guest platforms. So if you're in Paul Lloyd Robson's community, welcome, big welcome to you. We're going to get to meet this man who's doing great work with men up in I think on a small farm somewhere off in the wilderness of Denmark, where it's probably getting cold, or probably is cold already.
Yeah.
Um, yes. So Hans, did you put a link in the chat for people who want to join the summit?
I did.
It's free to join. Hans posted, here's the link. Next time Hans will write, here is your link to join the free Calling All Men Summit, and then post the link. Yes, it's our first time with this live stream and multi-stream. We're having a lot of fun. All right, so welcome everyone. Our guest for this hour is the founder and leader of Manifesto. He is married, he has 3 sons, and he's been working full-time in men's work since 2017. When he started this work, he set himself a mission to, quote unquote, restore manhood. That is a massive undertaking in today's world, I would say. He, he was a political scientist, a highly successful entrepreneur, uh, cosmopolitan, progressive, liberal, and atheist. Wow, that's a lot of interesting adjectives right there. He quickly found out that there was only one thing that he could really do to change and restore himself. So it is that he's primarily on his own life journey and has been transformed by his journey. Um, I'm reading a bio here that's in first person, so. All right. Yes, and I'll for the rest of the bio, for the rest of his story, we'll just ask him live. Paul Lloyd Robson, welcome to Calling All Men.
Thanks very much, Michael. It's an honor to be joining here, and thanks for taking the initiative to do this. It's just saw the fantastic line of speakers and thought this sounds like a great initiative, and there's just such a need for this work. So great to see you guys are gathering us together and trying to bring things together. And I just saw average to alpha, also another very, very powerful, strong men's worker. Father Michael Butler just commented and said he's online. So nice to see you, Father Michael, and someone's watching us at least. That's great to see.
Excellent. Yeah, average to alpha. I don't know what your real name is, but if you might be interested in being interviewed, joining us on a live stream, just hit us up. Let us know. Yes. All right. So, Paul, why don't we start by this? We'll get into your story, but maybe you can start by just telling us how does the crisis of men and boys today, how does this touch you personally, perhaps in your own personal story or with the men you help, or maybe with your kids?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I'm a father of 3 boys, 3 sons, and I can see that the world that they are being born into is fragmenting, disintegrating, and being torn apart in more and more ways. And it's something that affected me in my life to a certain extent, although I had a very, very stable and solid upbringing in my childhood, two parents that really loved each other and cared for each other and are still, kind of sit together and hold hands today. So I feel very lucky to have had that. And so I can see, my oldest son is 17 years old, and there's some ways in which there's a lot of the insights that I have today that I didn't have when he was a child. He's grown to be a really strong boy in many ways. But what I see is the biggest challenge we're facing is disintegration, and that things are falling apart. Meaning is falling apart. My sons even have to be confronted with this question. Actually, my oldest son, in his biology classes, he told me that at least once a week, his biology teacher will tell him that the only gender that actually matters is the gender that you think you are, or the one that you feel you are. So we have to get into touch with our feelings. And then, as we know, feelings can change all the time. Sometimes I like manhood and masculinity. Sometimes I feel angry and frustrated about it. Then I have to challenge, be wondering about my foundational identity. So there's this foundational fragmentation and disintegration that's happening. And that's really, I think we can all feel it. We can feel how things we've taken for granted is kind of falling to pieces underneath us. And we need to find something far more deeper and coherent in order to hold it all together.
Yeah, deeper than just how we feel or the whim of the moment.
Definitely deeper than that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is a very taboo conversation today. What is it to be a man? Although I imagine for all of human history, it wasn't that difficult to answer. We're definitely in changing times. I think we're all trying to figure out. I think a lot of this battle is about how can everyone feel included, right, in this vast human expansive world. Now that we're all online, in one huge community of 7 or 8 billion people, I think everyone's trying to fight over, no, you got to talk like this. No, you got to categorize like this, label like that, so that people don't feel excluded or threatened and things like this. And I think that's kind of it's almost an unmanageable problem. And it comes with other side effects, such as potentially, our sons maybe not knowing who they are, or what they are. How well am I articulating what you're pointing at here?
Yeah, I mean, if we want to talk about the roots of the problem, I think there was this assumption that I also bought into for most of my adult life, was that really just basically we can live a life of complete rationality and logic. And the way there is really to cut off the roots of all of the wisdom of our forefathers, everything that we're based on. And we just have to base our lives on the sense data that's around us right now and what science is telling us. And if we do this, then everybody will just be united in perfect harmony and peace, and everything's going to work. So all that old stuff, the superstition, the mystical ideas and stories and stuff like that, we don't need that anymore. We can just drop it. And then everything's going to be peaceful and great. I come from a country, South Africa. I've been living there for some time, but I still go and visit as much as I can, and I love that country in many ways. But when I was a boy or a young teenager, then there was a massive change that happened in South Africa, and it was a time of great hope and expectation and optimism about the future, in that we can all be brought together, people from very, very different nations and cultures and identities, under what we call the Rainbow Nation, and would be united under this modern, liberal, progressive project of, kind of freedom and liberal democracy. And if we did this, then everything's just going to be great and perfect, and it's all going to work. And we all bought into that and believed it. And unfortunately, what's happening in South Africa right now is kind of shown, I know there's all kinds of reasons for that, and I don't think we need to go into that, but it's shown that this project hasn't really succeeded very well. And so there's a need to re-examine our ideas about who we are, where we come from, what we're doing here, and where it is that we want to go to.
Yeah, and it's taboo. In fact, I mean, just this conversation is taboo in much of the Western world today, because, you're saying something which could be racist or exclude people or sexist or whatever. And there's a lot about just manhood today, that conversations that you're not supposed to have. So yeah, Hans, you want to jump in on this topic?
I was just thinking of the different drummer by Scott Peck, who was describing. It may be a little off topic. I'm wondering about it. And I want to ask Paul. And he said community. We tend to think that real community, is going to happen when we see that when we finally realize we're all the same, and then we will get along. And he says real community does not happen when we realize we're all the same and then we get along. It's realizing we're completely different. We celebrate those differences and we get along anyway. You know? And I don't know if if that's what you are referring to and what's happening in South Africa, but I thought that's a very interesting idea that has impacted me a lot over the years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that stories are important. Stories like the story of my people and where we come from and how we came to be are important. It can't be ignored. But there's a need also to transcend some of these stories, because we also see that our forefathers have been at war with each other and have been fighting. And, there's been a tribalistic kind of conflict for a lot of human history as well. So we need to, I think, go back to the stories that we tell about ourselves and understand them. And we need to be able to, find a way of drawing stories together, I guess. And it's not an easy work, and it needs to be done at an individual level, and you can't push it. You can't just create a story of like, oh yeah, we're going to go out to Iraq and we're going to, get rid of their despots and we're going to give them all freedom and then everything's going to be great. Then it's like, no, these people have a long, long, proud history as a people that goes back thousands of years. And so you can't force a story on people. You have to be able to connect.
Yeah, if you look at Kenya, where I'm at right now, the British came in, with the ideals of liberal democracy, and the Kenyans got together, 50-some tribes got together eventually and threw out the British. And what the British did when they left is they drew artificial lines through tribal territories, setting up democracy, which then proceeded to lead to a lot of violence, because there was one tribe that was now the majority based on how they drew the lines of the country. And so it's a lot of well-meaning ideas that a lot of people have today. I have a good idea of how this could change the world for the better. And of course, you don't realize until after you put it in place all the many consequences of that. And a lot of boys and young men struggling with their identity, and men in general. Like, what is it to be a man? How do I become a man? How do I know if I'm a man? I hear a lot of these kinds of questions. So, Paul, maybe you can talk to us about, maybe your journey into men's work, and maybe manhood as well, and how you help men today with this crisis of foundational identity.
Yeah. How long a story do you want? Let's see. I'll try to do the 5-minute version or something like that. I grew up in a conservative home, but left South Africa, moved to Scandinavia when I was 19, 20 years old. I went to England when I was 18 years old, and then ended up meeting a Danish girl. She was my girlfriend. Then we got married, and so I moved here permanently, and kind of adopted very much a secular, liberal worldview, which was kind of like the mainstream cultural view of Danish society in many ways. And in many ways, that was, Denmark's been an incredibly successful country in creating abundant wealth and material goods. And on the surface level, there's many things that are working well. And it is a great country, and there are many things. There's a fantastic culture here of consensus, and kind of listening to each other. And you see that in politics, and you also see that between men and women. I think that there's a very, very large emphasis on equality. Obviously, feminism has been quite big here, but like where Sweden's kind of like, they have a feminist political party and things have really kind of gone overboard here, I'd say Denmark still maintains a certain groundedness as well. So while we can see some of the problems there's been in time past between men and women, it's not too exaggerated. But at the same time, I'd say that there's been a rejection, a cutting off of the roots of wisdom that our society is built on. And so that's what I think I was missing out on, because what happened is I was living this life and very much focused on my career and all that kind of stuff. I came to the end of finding meaning for myself. I had basically achieved the goals that I thought I wanted to achieve and reached my desires, and found myself very unfulfilled, and wasn't living a life of integrity as a man at this time, I would say, as well. So I had a pornography habit, especially, that was influencing my relationship with my partner, and I would say, was a very major factor in us actually then breaking up, even though we had a child at that time. And this sent me out on a spiritual search, because I realized there had to be more meaning to life than the kind of superficial materialistic worldview that I had that came through the mainstream culture. In Denmark, then anything spiritual is seen as something private and not for open kind of public discussion. And so I started by exploring all kinds of different things and traveling a lot, going to different places, trying to find a deeper meaning in life, exploring philosophy, Eastern traditions, and these kinds of things. And had a wild and wonderful journey in many ways and many experiences, but found actually a lot of the time that I was, creating a lot more chaos in my own life. But then what happened is, when I was able to just connect with men in male-only spaces, there was a depth of connection and clarity that I was able to attain. And I realized that I'd been competing a lot with other men because of my focus on achieving for myself. And then was able to, and luckily met some people where I was able to experience brotherhood with other men, which really brought me to be able to experience something far more deeper and meaningful than the kind of materials things that I'd been chasing up to that point. And so this led me to gaining a lot of clarity. We organized some events called Men's Research Weekends, where we were like 30, 35 guys together, which were really life-changing. We wrote a manifest on manhood and masculinity, which we put out online. And that led us to then organizing the first European men's gathering in 2017. There was like 140 guys that came there from 30 different countries. We did it up in Sweden, and we've been repeating that every year then up until last year. And I've been using, what started as a kind of a hobby and a spiritual journey, grew for me into a life passion and something very that I feel I have the best job in the world today. And I'm able to, be able to, really learn more about myself through meeting other men as well. And so while I'm helping other guys, then I've also found the need for having something greater than myself that I can draw inspiration from. And I do that on, I guess, several different levels. First of all, spiritually, I've converted to Orthodox Christianity, where I found a really holistic and complete worldview and anthropology, cosmology that really gives meaning. And I've seen the more I've based my work on these principles, the more that they've been working. I've joined the Danish military, the Home Guard, where I'm training now. There's actually an entrance exam for an elite special forces unit in the Danish Home Guard, which is certified to like NATO special forces standards, where I'm like the old guy in the group. So I'm not sure if I'm going to make it or not. I'm 42 years old. So I'm with a whole bunch of younger, much more strong and fit young men, but maybe have a little bit of life experience that can be useful for me there. And then I'd say the core of actually my work of becoming a better man is really in my relationship with my wife and with my family here, where I'm living, where me and my wife, we are really focused on this idea. I really see that like growing in intimacy with her is what makes me into a more complete person. I'm definitely a person who's, I've tended to, swing more to the kind of more masculine, strong side of life. And so being able to really understand a woman who has a very, very different life, she's Danish, a very, very, very worldview than myself helps me to try and balance myself. And it's a work that'll continue for the rest of my life, I'm sure, as well.
Yes. Hans, your comment there isn't proper English. You mean with her?
It's remarkable. Just yesterday, Frederick was also telling a story in which his work came out of, or a big part of the current work he's doing came out of a growth from being in competition with men to discovering, say, the healing powers of being among men. And I think that's fascinating to me to see that's similar with a couple of speakers now, to really discovery of that power, of brotherhood.
Yeah. There's something about when you're with men where you have an intention of working towards deeper understanding with each other. You don't relativize each other's truths. And so you have your perspective, I have my perspective, but we actually honestly try in a non-confrontational way, but also like in a way where we're really listening to each other and we're able to contradict each other or point out incoherencies in each other's perspectives, that we can get to see things far deeper. And there's been few things in my life that have been more valuable for me than having men around me who dare to contradict me, who dare to point out when I do something wrong, and help me to see some of my shortcomings. So that's something that has really been a powerful thing. But it took me, I feel like it's a little bit of a lost art sometimes. I think, I realized as well, so I never went to the military. Actually, when I went to school, it was a boys only school. But as soon as I left school, I kind of, was in mixed gender environments almost all the time, where I think it's been natural for our forefathers that a lot of the time you were in male only environments. So I think this mixed gender environment thing isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it means that sometimes we're lacking a real firsthand experience of the depth of male relationships that guys had when they, were out, like freezing cold and doing a very difficult task together, or whatever it was, when people lived in times of slightly less material abundance than what we have today.
Yeah, I was about 30 years ago, I was just a young man, and I was working like as an on-call banquet waiter at some different hotels in Austin, Texas. And many of these hotels were staffed almost entirely by Mexicans. And you get prepared for this big event, and all the men would work together and all the women would work together. They would I look frozen here. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you fine. The video is a little choppy, but the audio is fine.
And me, I come from a large family, and I'm very close with my sisters. And I would go and I would hang out with both groups. I would be a brother to the men. I would be a brother to the women. And they thought it was so strange. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing here with the women? And the men would wonder, what are you doing over there with the women? And the women came to call me hermano, which means brother, because I was behaving like a brother, but not like in their culture. Like, men just you don't work with other women, you're not hanging out with other women. And I found that in Uganda as well. Like, I was living with some nuns in rural Uganda, and after dinner, I want to go and help with the dishes. And they're like, what are you doing here? This is not your space, like, they didn't want to help. And there was honor for them in playing their role. It wasn't like a diminished role to be in the kitchen, and I see that as I travel the world. There are a lot of societies that if you're a man, you're just instantly welcome among men. There's just kind of a certain whatever. But I see a lot of Western men who travel and they have challenges connecting with the local men. They're missing something. They're missing like that language or that know-how to just bond with other men a lot of times. And I think it goes to what you're pointing out, Paul, that a lot of times, and online is very much a mixed environment. Like, even right now, this is like a conversation amongst men, but who knows how many women are watching and will watch it and will criticize it, or we might be worried that they could be offended by it or whatever. Like, all men's faces have been disappeared in a lot of ways, and the internet is a big part of that.
Yeah. So, Michael, let me talk about this thing about vulnerability and men being vulnerable, because I think it's one of the things that you hear the most, and especially in mainstream channels, but I think is very misunderstood a lot of the time. Because obviously, having a space where you can share your challenges and your difficulties is a very good thing and necessary for everybody to be able to do. And maybe for the first 28 years of my life, I would do this with women. And today I do it almost exclusively with men, even though I'm married. And as I said, like I'm working to become more intimate with my wife. Then if I have a challenge, if I have something I'm not sure about, if there's something I don't know, I first of all talk to my male friends about it. And I have a buddy that I do. It's actually my biological brother. We call each other up every single day at 2:00 in the afternoon, Danish time. And we have a chat. And if there's some difficulty that I have, then I'll mention it to him and we talk it through, and I get more clarity and a clear idea of who I am and way to move forward. And he challenges me on things as well, like in a way that I would feel uncomfortable with my wife doing as well, right? I can take it a lot more from him. And so I get sharper and much more, aware of my shortcomings and failures when I do that with him. And then when I go meet my wife, she meets a man who's clear and who's dealt already with some of these difficulties and insecurities and insufficiencies and stuff like that. And so she benefits a whole lot from it as well. And the tendency of women when they, and this is what women are great with, is they offer sympathy. And so that's what I had the first 27, 28 years of my life. When something was difficult, when I was hurting or something like that, I'd go to a woman and tell her, and she would offer me sympathy and she'd offer me understanding. And that's nice. But to tell you the truth, it's really just a plaster on a sore that doesn't do something to heal the wound about how you're getting there in the first place. And so that was why it was difficult to do it with other guys, is because they would say well, if you're feeling like that, why don't you just sort out the problem and deal with it and stop being such an idiot in the first place, right? And so then I'd be confronted with my own shortcomings, and so that's what I missed out on, I guess, earlier on in life. But that's what I get today, and I think in the long term, a lot of women think they want men to be vulnerable and soft and to share their feelings with them, but actually they don't find it attractive whatsoever. It's not very attractive for women with a guy who's constantly, it actually ends up feeling very obsessive, it's like narcissistic. You want a guy who's stable, who knows who he is, where he's going, what he's doing, as much as possible, and not constantly in doubt and confused about who he is and where he's going.
Yeah. I think that's great. By the way, shout out to all the brothers out there, all the men who are holding other men accountable and, showing up for them. If you're watching this right now and there's a man like that in your life, tag him in the comments, invite him to this conversation. Honor him, invite him, welcome him. Hans?
You passing it on, so I would ask questions. No, I like this very much. I write about masculinity and femininity in my work, and what the last thing that Paul said there was, he said they don't want a man who's constantly in doubt. They want a man who's strong. The way I present it is, it's a man of strength is gaining the liberty to be vulnerable, but it's only a man of strength when he shows his vulnerability. Now it becomes an extra power, So it's not a vulnerability or a weakness like Woody Allen kind of this kind of thing. But if it's a man of strength who knows who he is, who loves himself enough, and then he shows vulnerability, I find that is way more that is accepted. That it's even a strength for a man. But first he has to be a man of strength.
I would add that I think that a key difference here that a lot of men don't get is it's really about your relationship to what you're feeling. So if you're a victim if your emotions are because you're perceiving yourself as a victim of circumstance, or you can't do it, or you're not capable, then you're a burden, and you're a little boy, and and it is pathetic to experience in a way by your woman, But
and the point is just that, so we are sometimes not strong. Sometimes we are needy, but that's what that's what we have brothers for. That's why we need other guys around us, so we can also draw on their strength, So that's one of the primary things I've been learning from this military training is when you're out on a 5 or a 10-day camp, then they're pushing you constantly. They're trying to get under your skin. They're trying to trigger your insecurities. And every single guy at some point during that weekend, he's going to make mistakes. He's going to do something stupid. He's going to get humiliated. And so then what happens in that moment is there's going to be a guy next to you. And if that guy is looking down on you and enjoying a little bit your failure, then that's going to hurt. and you're going to slip even further down, and it's going to get even more in your mind, right? But if that guy just, kind of like, and it can just be a look, it can be a simple word, it can be just a hand on the shoulder. If he's there to just lift you up in his spirit, then you can take so much more.
Yes.
And so how do you get guys like that next to you? Well, you become that guy who's lifting the other guys up, even when things are tough, right? You're watching out for the occasions when people are under pressure, when we're all hurting, when other guys are failing, and you're thinking, how can I be lifting people up? Not in a kind of like, oh, I'm going to show you kind of, I'm the strong guy here kind of way, but in a humble, just a subtle and brotherly loving way. That's what we try and do, and that's how we build up that kind of fellowship together.
That's beautiful. I hear what you're saying is like, this is how we create brotherhood. This is how we create bonds of brotherhood, is show up as the brother, right? Show up having the other man's back, show up in that, affirm him and believe in him. And yeah, I love that. Yeah. I think like you were saying, Paul, so many men today just grow up not in any all male spaces, even growing up without a father or without a connection to a father, growing up even without brothers. Families are smaller today than they used to be. I don't know what any of that's like, because I grew up with a really present father and grandfathers, and I had brothers, and I had a lot, but then my brothers lost all of that when my dad got divorced, my younger brothers. And so I worried about them, and I worry about the young men today. So let's speak to like, how can we raise our boys to be men, Paul? How can we raise our sons into manhood? Or if we're not fathers, the other young men in our circumference, in our space, how can we not just be a brother, but perhaps be an elder or the father that they need?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think this goes back to the disintegration point that I was talking about, that we, before elderhood, and even this idea that, it takes a tribe to, or a village to raise a child, is that now in the big cosmopolitan city, then things have become very fragmented, and there's no natural community to perform this kind of thing. Like my oldest son, he's been in several different schools, moving from different groupings and having people coming and going, and so there hasn't been very stable community in his life that can play this role of forming and shaping his identity to be one thing. And so what happens is that a lot of his identity gets impacted by the mainstream culture. And what are the values of the mainstream culture? Well, it's material wealth and status and career and stuff like that. So I hope that he's received some parts in me that are working inside of him and that are going to shape him more and more in the long term. And, he's doing really well in being a well-balanced child. But I also see that there's not just one thing that he's able to integrate a complete personality behind. And part of that is, my failure to be able to love and cherish his mother. So the first fundamental split was when he was 1.5 years old. That split him between her. She's a high-level civil servant in the Danish government, and I'm this kind of entrepreneurial African guy living in Denmark, right? So there's a real diversion there, and he's incredibly loyal to both of us. And so he's trying to live up to both of these things, but that's just the first split that can then lead to multiple different other ones as friends and other kinds of influences come in. Right now, he's studying in a business school. He's working out, and he just ran his first marathon this year. He won the Danish national championships for high school mathematics when he wasn't even the highest class of mathematics. So there's many things that are working well in him as well. But what I often think about is the need for a spiritual center for boys, especially when we talk about this eldership. It's something that's been connected to spiritual communities. So he's been baptized in the Danish. There's a state church in Denmark. It's the Lutheran Church, but it's very much a church that doesn't even believe in its own roots and existence as well. And so this is where I see that in order to raise strong sons, I think we as men need to take our own lives far more seriously, to think about our own deaths, and to be able to find our own roots in something that goes beyond ourselves and my own little thoughts about existence, but actually goes back and understands something that's a lot greater than myself. And this is why I searched. Some 4 or 5 years ago, listening to Jordan Peterson, I started taking Christianity a little bit more seriously and started exploring that. First of all, it's kind of like very agnostic kind of thing, but then actually had an experience that like, wow, okay, there is something that is true and real about the divine, about there's something that I can use towards, I don't really understand what the word God means, but it makes sense to me. And the story of Christ really is the bringing together of the physicality, the immanence of existence, the juiciness of life, together with something that's far higher than myself and is indescribable in some ways. That's what I saw in Jesus Christ. And so when I went into that and started visiting churches and had a really hard time finding good men inside the churches, I found like all the men I met inside the churches were far less reliable and solid than the guys I knew from men's work. And that was very much the case until I stepped into an Orthodox church. And there I found something that I feel is far more deeper, far more mysterious, and far more powerful. And so I submitted myself to that tradition. And I bought into that tradition. I practice that tradition. Then forms the cycle of my life on a daily, on a weekly, on a yearly basis. And so I try and marinate my soul in that tradition. And I think that's something that then connects me to something that I can impart to my sons.
That's beautiful. I was going to ask you about that when you mentioned becoming Christian earlier. So would you say like, okay, here's what I'm hearing. I'm guessing you're not like a true believer, but you submitted yourself to it. You've devoted yourself to it. Like it's a cultural, a traditional, for the sake of having that to bring your sons up in and to pass on, because that's a lot more stable than anything else that you could be a part of. Is that accurate?
So, I mean, there's this word faith. So religion necessitates something called faith. One understanding of faith, and this is previously my understanding of faith is something that like you don't really know something for sure, but you decide to believe in it, a little bit like you're talking about right now. But as I've tried to understand this word more, then I think there's a biblical verse by St. Paul. He says something like faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. And so the way that I see it is like, as I submitted myself to that tradition, then what happened is there was like a little seed of faith that somehow was planted and got watered. And what I saw is that it expanded. It expanded. It got confirmed. It became more substantial and more evidential. And so, because I see it works. Every tiny little step I take, it works. And so what I found is like the things that I didn't believe in before and rejected Christianity for before, I still don't believe in those things because they were very unnuanced and even twisted. I believe that a lot of the understanding of Christianity that we reject is often rejected. I think the new atheists had a lot of good points. I loved Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and these guys. They made a lot of sense to me, and I still agree with a lot of their points. But what I found is that there is a far deeper wisdom, which is sometimes hard to put words onto, but that's found within these traditions, they're illustrating like fundamental patterns of existence that are very meaningful. So I believe that the biblical stories are true, not necessarily in a kind of forensic scientific sense at all. Actually, certainly not in a forensic scientific sense. I don't think they were written far before forensic science existed, but I believe that they're true in a far deeper sense than that.
I have a question, Paul. Michael asked a couple of minutes ago, what can we do? What can you do to be a great father, elder, brother for the other? Is your story one that suggests that the best thing you can do is be a great example?
Be a good son, yeah, to be a good son. But there's multiple levels of doing this. So, if we talk about a father-son relationship, if I have a son, it's a hierarchical relationship. The father is above the son, right? And so if I want to be a good father, I first need to be a good son. and so the place where I'm being challenged with that right now very much is in the military training as well, because I've been an entrepreneur for like my entire adult life pretty much. And so receiving an order and just doing it, even when I disagree, even when I don't understand the overall plan, is really, really difficult. So I think being a good son is, and submitting to the people who I'm supposed to be submitting to. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the Christian God is described as God the Father, that there's a kind of a relationship there. Actually, the way I understand it is that I'm actually the bridegroom. I'm the bride in relation to God the Father, towards Christ. So I'm in a feminine role towards God. And that's the model. The marriage between God and me, or mankind, is an icon, or my marriage with my wife is an icon of that marriage between God and man. So these models are at multiple different levels. They're in the military, they're in religion, and they're in our concrete, biological relationships as well. If I'm in my workplace, then I'm also in kind of like hierarchical relationships as well. So the model for leadership, for fatherhood, is something like self-sacrificing love. That's the example that we're presented with. But self-sacrificing love doesn't mean just being, it doesn't compromise on truth. There's rules to existence. You can't just ignore the rules. So if my son runs out onto the road, I have to force him not to do that by grabbing him and pulling him back. That's the way I love my son, is by forcing him sometimes, because when I see him about, so just as much as, if I, to the extent that I can, I will use that. To the extent that I can help him to understand and build his own understanding, obviously that's a more optimal approach.
Yeah, I didn't grow up with touching any kind of Orthodox Christianity. I mean, you could say I was Orthodox Mormon, which is a very American Christian religion. And in that mythology, let's say, Jesus Christ is an older brother, and he sacrifices his own life to go back for the rest of his brothers and sisters, which is all of humanity. So like in that tradition, he is literally your elder brother. And so that was the kind of the archetype I had for being an older brother, which I am. And I think it's a very beautiful one. It's this kind of sacrificing love, not compromising, right? Not betraying your values for someone else or something like this, but sacrificing. And yeah, it's, even though I left that religion, what's remained with me is this kind of archetype of being an older brother. It's a powerful and a beautiful thing. So has me curious about Orthodox Christianity. I love your passion, Paul. I love, how you're speaking, and I'm attracted to, maybe I should go join the military. I find it very attractive. And so let me just address one of the men in the chat. I think it was our friend Average to Alpha. I'm not sure, but someone commented that, hey, I didn't know this channel existed. I signed up for the 50 interviews with men on the website. I didn't realize that we're doing live streams over here. Yeah, this is a whole other component we've added to the 50 men that we've interviewed. We're interviewing about 20 more this week live. And Paul is one of them. There's a lot of great men we're going to be interviewing. There are men out here. They're amazing men. They're all around the world doing amazing things. They all have unique insight and wisdom. And we're honored to host them and support them. So come and spread the word. Invite your men's group. Come to Calling All Men. Come to the Facebook group. Go to the website. Become a part of this. Share it. Tag a brother. And we're also going to be doing trainings. So Paul is going to be training our group of men next week. For the men who invest the small $79 in the summit to get the full library of all the videos, you also get a lot of bonus trainings. And some of these trainings are going to be live. Some of these trainings are going to be happening during this week of the summit. If you want to participate in that, we invite you to come and join us in that. We'll be doing some live trainings. And Paul, you're going to be training us in how to set up like an accountability partner with a brother, right?
Yeah. So this is something I've been doing the last 3.5 years or something like that. And all of the guys on Manifesto Core, the network of online men's groups that we run, are doing this daily. They get paired up with a guy who they're meeting once a week in their group, but every day they have a check-in. It's something that takes 3 to 5 minutes. You can also, sometimes your buddy calls take an hour, but you have a buddy call every day to be checking in. What's the one thing that you should be doing today that will make this a good day in many ways?
Do you speak to your men like that? What's the one thing you did today? I love it, man. I love your voice.
I would like to speak to what I see. Thank you, Michael, for setting this up, because what I see as a red thread almost to all the speakers here is such a care, a care for, and a desire to take care of other men and be there for other men. And that in itself is so uplifting and life affirming. It feels so incredible to know that there are men out there who so passionately do this work. And I think it's fantastic. And thank you, Paul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And I will mention, if you're curious about the orthodoxy thing, so Average to Alpha, who's been commenting on this conversation, he is a bodybuilder and a coach and an Orthodox priest. He actually is the combination of all of those things, and a big inspiration for me. We've been working together for some time, and I'm happy. I had no idea that he was able to log in and check this out, but he has been definitely helped me a lot to find some of these things. And I invited him to the European Men's Gathering several years ago. We had 3 elders, and 2 of the other ones were big celebrities as well, the 2 other ones. And Father Michael was fairly unknown coming there. And at the end of the European Men's Gathering, then all the men had to line up at one of the elders to get a blessing from him personally. And the line in front of Father Michael was like 90% of the guys, and the remaining 10% went to the other 2 elders. So it's really beautiful to see how he's able to reach out to just a very broad range of different men. This European Men's Gathering was very much a secular event at that time when we were organizing it.
Yeah, shout out to the elders out there, to the older men who are showing up in a big way for the younger generation and for everyone. If you're watching this, tag an elder in the comments. A man who's didn't have to be there for you, didn't have to show up there for you, didn't have to kind of walk with you through a hard time, but showed up anyway. Yes. Beautiful. So, so you'll be giving us a standard operating procedure for an accountability buddy call in our training. And that's for those of you who choose to, join the Calling All Men Summit. You join our membership. You get the trainings. Many of the men from the website, the 50 men, they've recorded pre-recorded trainings. We're also doing live trainings. So we invite you all to come and join us. I really appreciate, Paul, your contribution to this invitation into brotherhood that a lot of our speakers are talking about, into elderhood, into fatherhood. We need strong brothers, strong elders, strong fathers, strong men in today's world. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. And I invite you to leave us with a closing message.
Well, I'll just say thank you to you guys for putting this together. It's really appreciated and so necessary. And it's hard work. It's hard work to bring men together. So I just want to encourage people who are listening, sign up for everything that Michael's doing. Give it a like, share it on social media, spread the word. The more that people are talking about these subjects, the better. We have small differences. We have different traditions. We have different ideas. And, we can talk about those. But out to the world, there's really a time now for men to come together and to support each other. And then we can have those conversations as we find the network. But just creating the network, sharing our ideas openly and honestly with each other, it's so valuable. It's so strong. And then we can, in the right spaces, we can delve into where the differences are. But put aside the egos, guys, and let's lift each other. Let's be good brothers for each other. That's how we can lift that. There's such a massive need for this work. It's so small. Look at International Women's Day, International Men's Day, right? There's just no comparing the kind of coverage that these get. And so what we need, and women are good at lifting each other up like this. This is what women do. So let's take a leaf out of the woman's book and do this with each other as well. I think that's great. And then I'll just take the opportunity here to mention as well that my main gig is running a network of groups, men's groups, which we focus on accountability. Each man formulates a vision. He then sets goals on a quarterly level, and he works on daily habits. And we hold each other accountable to reaching implementing those habits and reaching those goals, and then adjusting the vision. The vision normally changes as we get closer to it. Then we realize like what we thought we wanted gets sharpened. So that's what we do. Manifesto with a PH, .com. That's one can read about all the work that I'm offering.
Beautiful. Awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, part of our idea with Calling All Men is to also gather the mentors and the elders and the teachers, the trainers of men. And so through our community and our email list going forward into 2024 and beyond, we're going to support men like you, doing this great work. And we need more men stepping up into roles of leadership. So we honor you for that, and yeah, men, we want, if you're watching this live, if you're on maybe Hans's YouTube page, or if you're on Paul's page on Facebook, come to facebook.com/Calling All Men Summit. Like the page so you can get notified about the upcoming conversations, and then go get on our email list at callingallmensummit.com. Watch the summit, and then you'll hear more about what Paul's up to the next year as well. And we welcome all men into this conversation. And again, Paul, thank you for joining us. And there's times when you get really passionate and you talk with that certain voice. And when I do that, Hans makes fun of me. He's like, because there's this it's like the trailer voice for a Hollywood movie where they say, "In a world where."
No. There's a slight difference. Paul has a more enthusiastic, younger take on it. Yours is more serious and more like the movie guy.
Yeah. Well, Paul.
That's great.
Paul, thank you so much for coming and sharing your voice and your wisdom. And we invite men to connect with Paul. And onwards.
Thank you, Paul.
Onwards.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you, Hans. Pleasure talking to you guys.
Likewise. Take care.